All right, I'm going to go do a cool talk, not beyond a reasonable doubt, but conceptually kind of on the Second Amendment and tax withholdings and the powers of a free state and how to enact social change and stuff like that based on Vermont and Vermont property taxes. So the interesting thing, if you look at the Second Amendment, is it says right in it, the right to keep and bear arms. And for me, the definition of bear arms is actually being able to serve in a militia and then withhold taxes, the right to conscientiously object to state law and the funding of state law, and then the right to receive. That's kind of like bearing arms, and then keeping arms is the actual possession of the firearm and being able to defend yourself from tyranny and stuff like that in the Second Amendment. But the last clause, I believe, says a necessity to a free state. So it writes right into an amendment that each state has its own subsection, basically the Second Amendment. And what I'm talking about now is the ninth article in the state of Vermont. The ninth article is kind of a further description of what the Second Amendment is. It isn't in the state of Vermont, and I've been in a legal battle right now for probably 7 months because the state of Vermont refused to respect the fact that the Second Amendment protects state rights, and the Second Amendment is the ultimate way to enact social justice when it comes to advocacy. And it's not because I think it's okay to remove people's rights by killing them. It's not the right that I need to feel the need to normally defend myself from tyranny with things like defense attorneys in the federal appeal system and an appellate court and stuff like that, and people that have been in the judiciary for a long time. It's actually because I can withhold taxes. So the Second Amendment in its conception, if you hear me lecture about the way that the Patriots wanted to put political pressure on a parliament, because I believe that the Patriots had a very difficult time being heard in the Parliament, and the Parliament would write tax laws, and the Patriots would have to pay those tax laws to basically fund colonialism in other colonies in other places in the world. And then the Parliament would tax them through things like stamps and tea, and then the governors would kind of set the law in each colony, and then the governors would kind of report back to the Parliament, who would write the laws and stuff like that. And then the king would actually declare war, if you refuse to pay taxes. That's how the British monarchy worked at the time. And the Patriots came up with the idea to withhold taxes in order to basically tell the parliaments to leave or to write laws that were better suited for them. And in a nutshell is the Second Amendment, as we can withhold taxes and we're not agreeing with the laws of the governor or the laws that are being handed down to us from the parliament. That's the Second Amendment. And basically what I said when I went to the State House that day is, if you don't communicate with me, I'm going to withhold taxes. And I'm going to withhold taxes for a reason. Your Speaker of the House isn't telling me how taxes are actually allocated to fund specific programs or specific statutes and policies I have an issue with. So my issue is, I withhold all taxes right now. I'm suing the state of Vermont for my sales tax. And I keep my receipts because I told them that I'm a conscientious objector in October of 2021 if they didn't talk to me within 30 days. So basically, what I'm saying is, if the Speaker of the House told me how specific taxes were allocated to public inebriate and which laws went to fund public inebriate, I would not be funding those specific laws through the specific thing, be it not, maybe it's safety inspection, maybe it's sales tax, maybe it's a percentage of sales tax, because I know where that money's going and how it's, based on those laws and things like that. But because they wouldn't communicate with me, I'm withholding all taxes. And not only am I withholding all taxes, I'm defunding their state government by, engaging them in a lengthy legal battle, which they probably paid over $500,000 already. I mean, they spent something like $168,000 just in medical fees that I was declining at the Brattleboro retreat. And that was just at the Brattleboro retreat, and that was just in medical fees, which basically meant people or nurses talking to me because I wasn't even really getting real treatment. I was in a legal battle. So the state of Vermont spent something like $700,000 to investigate the fact that I did a peaceful protest where I had a safely stored gun to make a point. I don't have to pay your taxes. I don't have to pay your taxes because I have a safely stored gun. And I don't have to adhere to your freaking laws. That's tyranny. So if the parliament writes laws we don't agree with in the United States of America, and the government's enforcing those laws, how do we enact social justice without killing the government and lynching them? Through withholding taxes. Because they can't operate. They can't fund the courts. They can't fund the Royal Navy. That's the power of the Second Amendment. So basically, what I would have done if the Speaker of the House did her ethical obligation and told me how taxes are being allocated, and there's a reason she needs to be honest about that. She has our property, and she takes our property every day without a warrant. She allocates funding in the state of Vermont. So if she told me which funding was going to the public inebriate program, I would have ceased funding to that. I probably would have continued to work, and I would have been a conscientious objector to unnecessary violations and conditions of release, and overly stringent policies, that create those violations that make up for over a quarter of our prison population. And the public inebriate program unrevised, which is a solution as part of my public inebriate expansion package that I'm willing to sell Vermont or any other state if they work or contract with me, to basically reduce Vermont's prison population by a quarter within 3 years and promote a public safety effort and help a bunch of people not fatally overdose. But now, because the state of Vermont didn't want to respect, my third formal grievance, you could call it a remonstrance. I call it a decree. Because I wrote a decree saying, I'm not going to pay taxes. This is why I'm not paying taxes. And I wanted judicial sign-off. So I wanted a federal district judge to say, yeah, Kyle, that's the Second Amendment. You have the right to withhold taxes. And because I would ask other people if they had an issue with a quarter of the prison population being housed, if they had an issue with reoffense, recidivism, with fatal overdose, if they have an issue with an $8.5 billion budget and not putting that funding into our schools or anything else, to withhold a small percentage of their taxes to put political pressure on the legislature or local police or anything else. But if the Speaker of the House who allocates that money, or the mayor or whomever on the select board or whatever, isn't honest with me when I ask them about tax allocation, I can't withhold taxes conscientiously to enact social justice for specific programs. And what happens is we start defunding the entire state government. So the state government, I believe, has to raise $8.5 billion next year. And they have to do that through money that we pay them, because they don't have the $8.5 billion for the budget. It's a proposed budget, and we have to raise that money for them to spend. So if they can't raise $8.5 billion, what happens is the state government shuts down. They're going to have to basically probably take federal bailout money, or maybe they have some type of reserve, but I don't think they do. I think they have a general fund, and I don't think the general fund goes from year to year. So if you start defunding state government, they're probably going to have to take a federal bailout. But the interesting thing to think about is, most of the prison population that is housed, unnecessarily is because of violations of conditions of release. So as a conscientious objector, I wrote that. So if I'm objecting to state statute, I'm objecting to Title 15, I'm objecting to Title 13 statutes, and I'm objecting to the money raised to fund those statutes that are violations of conditions of release that are unnecessary. So I'm saying, I'm a people, we the people of Vermont, of a free state, because there's 49 other people impacting how our federal tax money is being spent, and we can recede. That's just what we can do. And the federal government will give us the Army Guard. They will, and they'll work with us to do trade deals and stuff like that. It's, it's understanding the Second Amendment, and I study it extensively, and that's what I do for a living. But if we the people have a problem with state statute, be it a heartbeat bill or anything else, we don't have to fund it, and we don't have to recognize it as law. That's the point. The legislature works for us. They write laws for us. So when we're not happy with their laws, we don't have to follow their laws, and we don't have to fund those laws that we're not consenting to, that should be written for the common good of the people. And the state can't write laws for small minority groups. It's just that's not the way democracy works, especially if it's removing rights for the majority. But you don't have to follow those laws. You don't. I mean, if you have your own property, you're not impacting other people or whatever, you can conscientiously object to that type of thing and not pay their taxes. That's the Second Amendment. And it's based on property ownership. So the 9th article in Vermont says it's the key to protecting 3 God-given rights, right? The right to life, liberty, and pursuit of property. And it's pursuit of property, not pursuit of happiness, because in America we have to purchase property. In America we have to purchase land, particularly, to have freedom. It's just an unfortunate necessity in America. We have to earn money and be capitalist in order to have that Bill of Rights. Our Bill of Rights is protected by our Constitution. In our, Constitution and our Bill of Rights, you need to have capitalism, as your primary, form of whatever, to own property, to be free, to have the Bill of Rights. It's just capitalism just goes with our Bill of Rights. Democratic socialism doesn't, communism doesn't, authoritarian regimes don't. I mean, the way that, money is distributed and stuff like that directly equates to protecting your Bill of Rights when it comes to property and globalism and stuff like that. So you can't have a socialist society and the Bill of Rights, and you can't have your freedom without work or property. So to make a long story short, property is the key to protecting our happiness. Property is the key to protecting our happiness because we can, basically own freedom. We can own land, we can own cars. We have the ability to be free because of land ownership and stuff like that. So to protect our property from a tyrannical government, we need firearms, right? That just makes sense. If the government's trying to take our money or take our property, We can ask them to leave our lands. But that's not what this is about. This is about me objecting to conditions of release written by a state government that don't help anybody. You guys kept over a quarter of the prison population housed the last 3 years, and the state of Vermont's probably spent close to $200 million. And this isn't brushing me off. $200 million is about 2% of the $8 billion budget that you guys have to raise. I mean, you can continue to brush off your valedictorian, but like I offered to basically save you guys between 2 and 3% of an $8 billion budget and prevent a bunch of fatal overdoses by reducing the prison population. And you guys called me crazy, called me violence. I mean, this is you not respecting your valedictorian, and now you're trying to avoid a lawsuit. So I'm withholding taxes, and I'm planning on not just suing the state of Vermont for my sales taxes. I am planning on auditing them and asking how much money they've spent on this debacle, that is investigating a guy that tried to help a bunch of people in Vermont because they didn't want to get sued. And right now the total's probably at $700,000, and I'll probably be over $1 million that the state of Vermont spent to prove that I guess I slightly raised my voice because I was frustrated as part of a readdress to a third formal grievance or decree. But to make a long story short, that's how to influence the legislature. If they're writing laws you don't agree with, you don't have to follow them. If they are written for the common good of the people, and you do have to respect federal law. And you don't have to fund the law. But the purpose of this talk is to talk about property ownership. So in the state of Vermont, property taxes go towards funding local municipalities. Local municipalities are police, they're fire, school. Local municipalities is stuff in your city or in your state, and it's funded with our property taxes. In Vermont, it's normally about 2%. 2% is the milk, that Vermont produced from Bruce Brothers. For years, we had a thriving dairy industry, and we're trying to get back into it small scale, based on 2% milk, where a lot of the property was owned by dairy farmers. 2% is the amount of property taxes, or on average, it's around 2%. It's probably slightly more than 2% now, 2.1, 2.12. Property is sometimes lower than 2%. Property tax in Vermont is normally about 2%. And what I'm saying is 2% is a nice ratio for tax withholdings. So a lot of us were really scared about having a Democratic majority, and Vermont's just very, very radical, really, but very liberal heavy right now with who we're electing, and something that I'm trying to get them to do is institute gerrymandering in the Senate. And if they want to be an independent Republic of Vermont, they need gerrymandering in the House, and they need limitations on the governor's term, and they need to redo the way they do the Supreme Court. Like the federal government before tax allocation or any other stuff to actually balance the budget and trade deals with borders and things like that. But typically that 2% based on property goes to funding local municipalities. So what I'm saying is that if more than 2% of people withhold taxes, the state of Vermont cannot finance their government. You guys will go bankrupt. So if more than 2% of the people withhold all their taxes, if we withhold more than 2% of our taxes to the state of Vermont, you guys aren't going to be able to operate. You're going to have to dramatically, reduce the budget. It's going to be a serious issue. That's the power of property taxes. That's the power of property. That's the power of the Second Amendment in the state of Vermont. And we, the people, have that ability to influence state government. So if I don't like a heartbeat bill, if I don't like conditions of release, if I get the people of Vermont to withhold 3% of our taxes above 2%, your state government's going to be bankrupt. You're not going to be able to finance it no matter what your budget is. So if we, the people, are unhappy with our legislature, or the way that our judiciary is doing business, or the way that our executive branch is doing business, we have that power to defund them. And what I'm saying is, conceptually, If we withhold more than 2% of our property taxes, say 3%, we have the ability to tell all Republicans in a veto-proof majority or all Democrats in a veto-proof majority that we don't like the laws that they're making. And we have the ability to do that because we own property. We have the ability to do that because we can safely own a gun, like I demonstrated that day at the State House before people made a debauchery of our Constitution and my rights as an inhabitant. We have the ability to influence the legislature either way, super conservative, super liberal, or just unhappy. We don't have to vote for Governor Scott to put a veto-proof majority in check when it comes to the Democratic Party. We have the ability, much like the Patriots, to tell the state of Vermont, no, I'm not happy with paying an extra $1.5 billion for you to promote in long-term sustainability ideas when in a recession. Now is not the time for climate control. That's something in 5 years. Now is not the time for a stimulus package of $3.5 billion to promote universal health care. Now is the time for us to be athletic, to get in shape, so when we pay that first premium in 5 years with universal health care, premiums are dramatically lower for people that actually need it, and the people that don't want to opt into universal health care don't have to if they're hardworking conservative people or people with a lot of money that want, better health care than Canada offers. But we, the people that think like me from Chittenden County, I love MMA, or you have your snowboarding. Like, a lot of us are into our sports. A lot of us are into exercise as millennials. What we can do is stay healthy to reduce premiums for those of us that want to buy in, because that was the idea behind making everybody buy in with Obamacare. But now is not the time. We're in a recession. We need to get back to work. We need to spend our money locally. We need to stimulate the economy to get out of a recession, to get unemployment higher. After unemployment gets higher, inflation becomes higher, hopefully up over 2% to 3% or more. And you get out of a recession that way, because we owe China $10 trillion and we're $30 trillion in debt because of greedy investment bankers in the 2008 market crash. I mean, the Democratic Party's so radical now, they wanted to redistribute the way that we do tax allocation through property taxes without even understanding the power of the Second Amendment to recede if we don't like federal law, to withhold taxes and conscientiously object if we don't like state law, to prevent ourselves from tyranny if we're unhappy with policing. Or the power of what 2% can do for the state government, which is totally defund them. In a conscientious effort, if 3% of Vermont tells the legislature they're not happy with an extra $1 billion, they're not going to be able to balance their budget, man. They won't be able to do it. That's the power of the 2%. Property. Dairy. We the people have that strong of a voice, and in Vermont it's based on safe gun ownership. And what I'm saying is I'm asking some people, when I get done with this legal battle with the state of Vermont, to withhold taxes conscientiously. Be it Black Lives Matter, be it Heartbeat, be it anything. But what I am saying is I have a narrow focus on alternatives to incarceration, and we the people overspend by hundreds of millions of dollars every year because of unnecessary violations and overly stringent conditions of release policies that make up over a quarter of our prison population and cause fatal overdose. So if we withhold taxes and the state government is having a hard time raising that $8.5 billion because we're withholding even just 3 to 5% of our taxes, all of us, what happens? They better revise the public inebriate statute and pay Kyle T. Wolf and change policies that they set to violate people, or change the way that those statutes concerning violations are written, right? Or they're not going to be able to balance their budget. So, if the state of Vermont writes a heartbeat bill and we the people, don't fund it, they better revise it pretty freaking quickly, or they're not going to be able to fund anything. But specifically, conscientiously, if you stop paying all taxes, there goes our fire department, there goes our school system. So you have to do things. Those are the duties in the 9th article. You have to teach kids soccer. You have to teach kids hockey. You have to teach them a curriculum approved by the federal government. You have to defend your property with firearms because you're not playing municipalities with police. You have ethical duties to the community if you withhold all taxes. But if Jill Karnowski actually understands the Constitution rather than rewrite it, what happens is she is ethically obligated to tell us the money that's going to fund Planned Parenthood at the state level, and we're cutting the funding to it. We're cutting the funding to other things to put political pressure because we're not happy with having to get a safe procedure within 6 weeks or whatever. We'd like it at 13. State law. If the federal government, wants to criminalize something federally, or they want to make a Supreme Court ruling or something like that, we the people have the power to recede in a free state, and they will give us the Army National Guard. That's how it works. That's the Second Amendment. And some of you actually thought it was a good idea to rewrite our Constitution. But what I'm saying is, if Jill communicates her feelings and we write a decree like I wrote, because that's what I was doing at the State House. I brought them a decree that said, I'm not going to pay your taxes anymore. And they demonstrated how little they know about our Constitution or our democracy. So if Jill tells me how taxes are allocated to public inebriate, then I'm not funding specific things to just put pressure on public inebriate. And we the people don't bankrupt our schools, don't bankrupt our, court systems or other things like that, like I'm doing now. We can conscientiously withhold, but Jill allocates that money as the Speaker of the House, so she knows. She knows that, and she takes our property without a warrant. So she takes an oath to be honest with us, because she has our property and she took it without a warrant, our taxes. So I was asking people to commit tax evasion. I was asking people to withhold taxes conscientiously, to defund the public inebriate, to put political pressure on the legislature that writes the public inebriate statute, that writes the conditions of release statutes, and that write policies within those things in the courts. And the same thing can be said of municipalities like the police, if you actually know how to defund the police conscientiously. But if you don't have the person that allocates the money in town, city, or state government be honest with you about tax allocation, because they're removing our property, we have a difficult time influencing police when we're not happy with it. And what happens is people riot. What happens is police lose their jobs. And it's all because you didn't want to respect the Federal Amendment or your valedictorian.